Hi, welcome to this video. Today I want to talk about the purpose of having regular therapy, or what are the uses for having regular therapy. Okay, so I'm going to try and explain it on this sort of chart here, and I'm basing it on when I have clients come to me and sort of what I see happening, and I also hear about other therapists saying the same thing. So generally speaking, people will, there's going to be some generalizations in this video, because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to explain why it's important to have regular therapy and to follow through with a course of therapy that has been designed. It would have been designed specifically for you. Okay. Now, I think one of the first things is for people to overcome this idea that, somebody's only going to recommend therapy to me because I'm going to, they're just going to be making money. It's like a lot of things in life. I think the majority of cases, therapists really genuinely want to help people out. You will always get, people who are doing that. Okay, so, I'm going to assume that most therapists are genuinely looking out for their clients and their patients, and they want to help them. Okay, so let's just say, if you're a generalization again, generally speaking, let's say the 100% is where you're absolutely on top of your form. You don't have any childhood traumas to deal with. You've got absolutely nothing. Now, I mean, I don't know whether those people really exist or not. I think a lot of the time as well, I think this can go up and down. Okay, so this scale here from 0 is where you're feeling, you're feeling really down in the dumps, and you could be going minus. Okay, and this could be people who are suffering from clinical depression. People who are suffering from all sorts of mental health issues which really need attention and are impacting a person's quality of life to an extent that it's really just impairing everything that they're trying to do. It's possibly having a knock-on effect with people around them, like family members and relatives, etc. So let's just say that 0% would be where somebody really needs to have therapy. And again, everything is subjective, of course, and so different people deal with different with mental health issues in a slightly different way. So again, if I think back, I've come across some clients who said that they maybe feel like they're down here somewhere at the 20% mark. They have got a depression and such like. This is what they say they feel, right? I could have another client, and you go through, as a therapist, you go through the whole process of identifying what the cause is, what the timeline is for those kind of feelings and experiences, and you could get someone who is exactly the same and feel like they're up in maybe 80 to 60% and get it, and they also feel like, things are really tough and they're suffering from, depression. And so every case is slightly different. That's the point I'm trying to make. Okay. But why do I want to do this video? The reason why I want to do this video is to try and get across to people, anyone that watches this, why they would want to continue having therapy. Okay. Now, the person, the patient knows what's best, right? I mean, there isn't any doubt of that in my mind. I mean, that's on my ethos that I have here in my therapy room. So, as a therapist, we can only assist someone to try and get to wherever it is they want to go, right? Or where they want to be, and on what level that they are managing things. Okay, so if we think that life in general, right, goes up and down like a like a sine wave, and it could be really, really tough. It could peak, it could drop right down. We might stay down here for a little while and then come back up again, and we're recovering, right? Okay, let's just say that that's the average person who doesn't maybe necessarily need a therapist to overcome some life issues that are causing them, problems in their life. But let's just say we have somebody, let's just pick the 20% to 0 to 20% mark, right? Somebody comes to me and says that they're suffering these issues, and they want to overcome them because it's impeding, I don't know, their marriage, or it's impacting their relationships with people, or it's impacting their work. Now, this is what I think. This is not what I think. This is what I see happening. Okay, and I think what goes on in people's minds sometimes. So they go to a therapist, and we may identify with that person that they're potentially. I mean, we don't use this in therapy, but let's just say that a person is down here, right? And this person is called Joe, right? This doesn't relate to anyone, right? Okay, so Joe feels he needs to go to a therapist and get some help, right? Now, let's just say whatever it is that Joe is wants the therapist to help him through. We then find that Joe has a really, really good session, okay, and then he feels like he's up here, okay, right? So he's kind of done this, right? Now, what I see quite a lot of is that when somebody actually gets to that level, they then think, oh, that's amazing. I had a really, really good session. I feel so much better because obviously, they've jumped up approximately 20%. Hang on. So they then feel really, really good. Now, what I see quite often is that Joe here will then think, I feel really, really great. I feel like I can cope with life a little bit better and, get on with my life. And then they find they don't go to therapy again. Okay, so they don't feel like, they need the therapist anymore or something along those lines. Now, I've seen, again, generalization, potentially 2 weeks. Okay, so what tends to happen is for 2 weeks, Joe's feeling absolutely brilliant. But then actually what starts to happen is that Joe then starts going back down to 20% again, right? And then I find, over a period of time, Joe then finds he's gone back down here and life's become a bit of a problem for him again. So then he goes back to his therapist and says, oh, this is happening, that's happening, I need to get it. And so we have this kind of seesaw effect almost, so the therapist will take them through potentially the same process of intervention, or maybe a slightly different process, and it could be that Joe then maybe goes up to sort of 50% and goes up here, right? But what tends to happen, I find, is that unless there is regular therapy happening, Joe is just gonna keep seesawing up and down all the time, okay? And this is what happens quite a lot. Now, the other extreme to this is that somebody will go to a therapist and they're potentially down here, Joe's at 20%, and then, and this could be for him a really bad place to be, it's causing problems. What then happens is he has one therapy session, feels absolutely amazing afterwards, and then over a period of time it starts going down again. Now, I'm not saying that that's the same, generalizations again, but then doesn't ever go back to a therapist and turns around and starts saying to people, well, that didn't really work, that therapist didn't really work because they didn't help me, and I went there and tried to get help for this and it didn't really work, right? And that's where I think the negativity comes from, with people saying things like that about therapists. Now, I've come across loads of people who've done that, and I will say to them, how many times did you go to the therapist? And they'll say once and it didn't work. And I think, okay, that's not really a very good measure for anything, really. Okay, so the ideal situation is that as a therapist, what you want to do is, obviously depending on the person, because everyone is unique, you want to find that balance between getting up and kind of leveling up what Joe can deal with and what Joe is happy about, and Joe starts seeing progress in, you know, whatever it is he first went to a therapist for. And the regular therapy will kind of do this, you know, sometimes there'll be massive changes, sometimes there will be little changes. I know because I've had therapy myself, and I don't know of a psychotherapist who hasn't had therapy themselves, you know, at some point in their life. And they will then, if your therapist is good, your therapist will help you to kind of get up, you know, and then there may be times where the increment is actually very small, okay, you know, but it's still an increment. And then if you go to a good therapist, they actually will tell you, or they will instruct you on how you can measure. How do you know that this is actually happening? How do you know that this is actually working? What do you, you know, see? What do you hear? What do you feel? You know, about the feedback from within yourself that this is actually working. And then you will also recognize when it's not working, right? And so that needs to be addressed at the next session. So this is really the ideal situation, is that somebody, you know, a client will continue their journey, if you like, until they get to a point where they are absolutely, you know, and also on the part of the therapist as well, you know, that there isn't anything else left behind. The original issue that Joe went to the therapist for is no longer there, right? Now, having had therapy myself, you know, I found that once an issue had been resolved, and if it had been resolved within, you know, again, all depending on how fast somebody wants to resolve issues in their life, you know, 1 week or 2 weeks can sometimes, if a person's determined enough, they can actually make changes in their life quite rapid, and then they can move on to something else, because there isn't always just one thing, in my opinion. And in my experience, there is never just one thing, because one thing is resolved and the door's closed on that one thing, and you feel happy that that's been resolved. There's nearly always something else and something else and something else. And so, you know, Joe comes back again with another issue. Could potentially start off, you know, as an example, we're starting off here again, and then, you know, the therapy, and you keep doing this until everything is pretty much resolved. Again, it comes down to the client as to how much they want to resolve in their life. If they've suffered from a lot of childhood trauma in their life, you know, there could be compacted issues, layers of issues. I always liken it to an onion, you know, where there are multiple layers going on, and you know, you get rid of one layer, and then there's another layer with issues, and then you get rid of that layer, and it continues on. And so this form of regular therapy is actually really, really good, because it helps to get your client to a point where they just say, okay, I actually don't have any issues anymore. And of course, that internal referencing, they know, you get that from the client through, you know, congruence and rapport, that they are actually happy with everything going on. I mean, there's lots of techniques, but you know, this I think is just a general benchmark that I hope explains why it's good to have regular therapy. You know, and the same applies not just for psychotherapy, it applies to any form of alternative therapy. There isn't a one-stop shop cure for anything, really. It all comes down to how the person wants to, you know, how fast they want to recover, how fast they want to make change, etc. So anyway, I hope you found that useful, and I will see you again in another video soon.